Hi Student Success, welcome to your Chapter 3 lecture video. So Chapter 3, I'm just going to rely on the textbook itself, so I'm in Chapter 3. This chapter is called Thinking About Thought, which is very metacognitive. The way that we think about things is called metacognition, being aware of our thinking. And so as always, it starts off with a real quick, where are you with this topic? What goals do you have? Where do you want to go? And then the objectives of the chapter itself. So it starts talking about basically just there are different ways of thinking, and sometimes we have to shift our thinking as we become more ingrained in our college studies, mostly because we're expanding our perspectives. We're looking at different ideas and new content. And so we may have to critically think like we never have before, or think analytically, or be more creative. And so that's what this section is going to start talking about, different types of thinking. Not sure if you've heard of Bloom's taxonomy before, but it used to be more of a pyramid. But here they have this kind of, I'm going to make it a little bit larger for you. So this is kind of the levels of thinking. So at the very basic part of thinking, we remember and recall. This is kind of what you learn when you're very young. You learn, kind of memorize information, right? And there is a lot of value in that because you have to remember information to even build any further. But you can remember things but not understand it. Kind of think about anything you might know, or when you learned real little, you had to memorize it, but you didn't really understand the parts and pieces of it. So that's the next level, is understanding, really making sure that you know what it is that you are learning, explain where it came from. Then you want to be able to apply it, which is kind of the key. You want to be able to apply the information that you're learning. And then as you get a little deeper in this thinking, you can analyze information, break it down, see how it fits together, evaluate it, assess it, make some judgments, draw some conclusions. And then finally, the highest level of thinking is creating. So putting all of it together and creating something new. All of those are key parts of the thinking process. And so here's kind of a thought inventory. It's very informal. You can go through this if you want. When the last time you did some of these things. And then these are some thinking verbs. So those are what's tied to each of these kind of levels of understanding, some verbs that you might see. So think about assignments that you might have, or that you have right now, and the verbs they're using, what does that tie to? What level of knowing does that kind of connect to? All right, and then moving on to the next section, this is going to talk about critical thinking. And so they kind of talk about this, look at all these web pages, what we have access to. And so critical thinking is kind of more important than ever now, because there's so much information out there that we have to be very discernful about what is credible, what is reliable, what is just straight up fake. So really knowing how to kind of sift through the information and discover the ideas and really logically go through that thinking process. And so they do outline the critical thinking process here. And so they kind of put it in the perspective of decision making, which is what we do every single day. We make decisions, whether it's small decisions, what am I going to have for lunch, to larger decisions, what major am I going to, pursue. So they go through this process of, what's my problem or what's my issue? So again, maybe using my major. What major do I want to? I'm stuck. I don't know what I want to do. So what are your options? Kind of think about your choices. What do you know about each option? So listing out how many credits, licensure exams, GPAs, where are you getting the information? Evaluating the quality of that information. Hopefully you're going right to, a college website to find that. And then we have fallacies. And so fallacies, we see these, I'm just saying we in the very general sense, in online in particular all the time. So fallacies are kind of these flaws in logic that really weakens the argument. So we want to make sure that we're seeing it in other people, but also we're not using them ourselves. And so here's a whole list. One of the common ones is this generalization. We're making assumptions about a whole bunch of people based on maybe one or two people in that group. False cause, kind of putting things together that really do not go together. One thing does not necessarily cause the other. Talks about personalizations, making sure that we're not we're talking about the issue, not the person. Sometimes we will critique the person and not focus on the issue because we want to put the person down. We also sometimes do this thing called like, jumping on this bandwagon, like everyone's doing this, you should too. Well, that's a fallacy. Appealing to authority, saying that something is credible or valuable only because there's like a well-known name attached to it, whether it actually is credible or not. Having weak analogies and then false dichotomies. So those are some examples of fallacies. There are others. So I just wanted to make sure that we think about these things whenever we are presenting an argument or reading an argument. Are there holes basically in someone's argument? This goes through, again, here's like the example, what should I major in? So critical thinking is really embedded in all these different areas. And it goes through, like you can see here, all these things that we do that we critically think, and they were already kind of discussed in all these other chapters. So it really is a theme that runs through a lot of what we do, if not everything we do as a college student. Here are some general tips for critical thinking if you feel like you just don't think quite critically enough, or you need to kind of dig deeper with some areas of your content. Here are some tips to kind of help with that. This is some information on, how to make sure that things are kind of credible, high quality. So, obviously looking at web addresses, your URLs, your .edus, .coms, .govs, making sure that you are using something that is quality work. Look all around the website. What's the purpose? Who wrote it? Do other people weigh in? Are there references? And compare it to other information. I know sometimes we might get in a certain perspective and we're stuck on that perspective and we don't want to consider other things, but that's truly how we grow, is by considering other points of view. That's not saying that it's going to change our mind. We might still believe the way we felt beforehand, but that's what a big part of college is just knowing that our perspective is not the only perspective in the world. And so once we can start learning how other people see things or other opinions or values, then we can really start to dig deeper into that critical thinking. All right, from here we go on to they call it the aha, this creative thinking and how we can be more creative in our everyday academic life. A lot of people do tend to think that creative thinking has to be artistic thinking, and obviously creativity definitely goes into art and all of those different things, but you can also use it in just academics and your regular coursework that you do. So it's not something that you're necessarily born with, although some people are a little bit more inherently creative, but it is a skill you can hone, and it's about free form thinking. So really making sure that you are allowing yourself to think, I know it's kind of cliche, but outside the box. So here are some tips to be more creative in your thinking. Feed your curiosity, read as much as you can. Engage in as much media or literacy that you are able to. Be flexible with your thinking. Don't always assume that there's only one way, one answer. And of course, unless it's math, there's usually one answer. But even then, there's multiple ways to get to that answer. Look at all the different possibilities. Think about how you can combine old ideas into new ways. Just how the people, think this is what basically society does, is we take information that has already been presented or discovered and we build on it. We make it better in some cases. Think in metaphors. Sometimes that figurative language, metaphoric language really helps. Think of things in a different perspective and then ask questions. Creative thinkers are always asking questions. Kind of going past this here. All right, and then we start to talk about how all this plays into problem solving and decision making. There's a very detailed decision making process. And I want you to kind of think about this as you are making decisions today or whenever you're watching this video or in the next week. Or so again, maybe it can be something small, what am I going to wear today? What am I going to eat today? How am I going to study? We make decisions just all day long, every day. So here are just the basic steps. Define the problem. What is the issue? What is the question? What are you trying to figure out? Narrow it down. Are there smaller problems kind of leading up to it? What are some solutions to try to help solve the problem? Here's a little group brainstorming, and you'll see this as it relates to your assignment for this week. And then choose the best solution and then reflect on it. Did it work? How did it go? Would you do it this way again? This also goes into more detail about decision making and how that process can look. Again, because we are constantly making decisions. And so if you struggle with decision making, I know some people tend to kind of waver and go back and forth. Maybe this is a section you really want to pay attention to. All right, so there's lots of exercises in here, lots of activities. I encourage you to take a look, explore, especially if you feel like maybe you struggle with creative thinking or decision making. Spend more time in those sections, and then you'll see the assignment connected to this chapter is a creative thinking one. Hope you have a great week.